Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video. And in today's video, I'm going to be predicting the Amanda Serrano versus Katie Taylor trilogy fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and feel free to join the Patreon as well. We've got a couple members now, and I really appreciate all the support. You can recommend any combat sports related video for me to do. In these type of cards, I kind of go through the entirety of the cards in these videos. So if you want me to do kind of an individual breakdown of a singular fight on an undercard perhaps, then feel free to request it in the Patreon, and I've done a few of them already. And so just let's get straight into this. So I think, just to speak about the card kind of as a whole, and a few things I wanted to just touch upon before I get straight into the fights, I think this could be, oh, and I think this definitely is realistically the best all women's card by far. It's a true fighting card, which after the Paul versus Chavez fight, which we had a couple of weeks ago from Most Valuable Promotions, it's refreshing to see. It's nice to see because they are actually, like I say, putting on a proper boxing display. I think the true boxing fans, the boxing fans that aren't just rooting for your Jake Pauls and actually enjoy watching boxing, they're going to really enjoy this card. I mean, it's an absolutely stacked card. There's, what, 6 fights that are either, undisputed, unified, there's one interim world title fight, and, there's a lot of talent on this card, and they're showcasing of a great display of female talent, and it's just excellent to see. I don't feel like the women's divisions have had the kind of right recognition as so far, and a lot of these fighters that are on this card's careers, because they just haven't been pushed the same way, and a lot of them are really well talented, but like I said, just haven't been given the same opportunities that they really do deserve. And I mean, it seems like Most Valuable Promotions have found their niche. I mean, when they first signed Amanda Serrano, it seemed like they were really trying to get behind women's boxing, and hopefully they're now paying all these fighters arguably what do they deserve, because it's no real debate that the women's fighters don't get paid as well as the male fighters. And with His Excellency getting involved and doing great things on the men's side, he has kind of moved away from the women's side and not really been wanting to push that. And so hopefully these fighters are getting paid what they deserve. Of course, they're on a major platform with Netflix, and I mean, it will be interesting to see if they'll be able to sell as well on Netflix, just because obviously Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor, I think, was the most viewed women's fight ever, just as mainly as a result of, yes, it was a great fight, and yes, they're two really good names, but of course they were the co-main for the fight, in which everybody was really excited to see. Well, all the kind of American Netflix fans were really excited to see in Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. So it will be intriguing to see how well this does sell. It's nice to see that Netflix are getting involved with boxing again, because they're taking away the whole pay-per-view side of it for the moment at least, and it's seemingly selling well, and they're really trying to push it, which is good to see. And like I say, it seems like they are perhaps taking some of the big kind of women's names away from other promoters. And by looking at that, you look at your Katie Taylors, your Ellie Scotneys, your even just the name of like a Cherneka Johnson, a Savannah Marshall. These are all fighters who, Chantelle Cameron, another one, who seemingly not that long ago were with their own individual promoters. I mean, Ellie Scotney, yes, she was with Matchroom. Katie Taylor was with Matchroom, and Eddie Hearn was even in the ring when Katie Taylor beat Serrano in the last fight. And then, you also had your Cherneka Johnson with Top Rank, and your Chantelle Cameron not that long ago signing with Queensbury, which was made into quite a big thing. And now it seems like they're all perhaps going on to Most Valuable Promotions. Like I say, it seems like they all have been, signed on with MVP and are working solely with them, just due to the fact of, none of the other promoters who used to promote these fighters are pushing the fights at all. So I don't really know what's happening. I don't know if Katie Taylor still technically represents Matchroom at all, or if her and Ellie Scotney have officially joined with MVP. It's quite big what they're doing, and it's really taking away the women's boxing side and the entertainment element away from any of these other promoters, and they're really setting up their own market to, if they can make it work and there is a fan base for it, then they could really sell it well and make it their own big product. So we will have to wait and see for that. But of course, I've touched upon how stacked this card is. I think these type of stacked cards, you've kind of seen it in these Riyadh season events. Most of the time, we'll see at least one major upset, and to be fair, it seems to happen, especially when we've got, 6 of these major names who are expecting to be able to go out there and put on a great performance, or expected to do that. There's a few of them that probably would crumble under the lights, and it wouldn't surprise me if there is one or two upsets on this one, and it will be intriguing to see. Of course, MVP are wanting to push the best female fighters, but if one does lose, will they be willing to rebuild these fighters who lose on this card? Again, that's another interesting debate in which I've had in my mind. They've done that with Shadasia Green, and that's something in which I've given them credit for. But will they be willing with all these names to really try and rebuild their careers and maybe put them lower down on their other cards to be able to then, give them opportunities? And how many cards will they even need if they are, trying to take all these great fighters, winning or losing, and keep promoting them and pushing them and giving them a lot of money? It seems like it could be financially a bit of a mess, but we will have to wait and see. And I mean, there has been on multiple occasions now, we've seen champions really not really want to go and fight for the best versus the best. I mean, Dina Forsen was a bit of an example of that. She's had a title for a long time, and I mean, she was meant to fight on this. It's no discredit to her. She is a great fighter, and I'm not taking away, of course, she was pregnant and everything like that. That's why she wasn't on this card. But in general, fighters like her, Mercado just recently had a fight versus Ali, but before that was fighting, not real any big names, and was keeping her belt. And they're getting forced now, these champions, to actually defend against the best. And I think it's just about time, to be completely honest. And it is intriguing to see that for the most part, they are abiding by the 10 2-minute round rules. It seems like all the fights on this card is bar, perhaps Tia Bowl is fighting a 3-round fight. I'm not entirely sure, but of course she isn't fighting for one of the belts. So all the ones that are fighting for the belts seems like they are abiding by the 10 2-minute rounds, so seems like they can't really get out of that. But I'm going to start off, I'm going to go through all the fights in which have a major title on the line for, and we'll start off with the main event. We'll start off with Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano, of course, for the Undisputed World Super Lightweight titles. And I mean, I think it's always going to be a good fight. I think everybody knows that this is going to be a good fight no matter how we see it. Yes, it could get scrappy. Yes, there could be cuts, there could be headbutts, it could be a bit dirty, it could be a bit bloody. But it's going to be entertaining because it's two fighters that they've showcased that their styles will gel, and no matter what's going to happen in the fight, their fight is going to gel. And perhaps the fight could end early with a cut. That would be a real shame, but like I say, from what we've seen so far from both of them, both the fights will gel, and that's why they are the main events. That's why this is arguably, yes, it's a trilogy, but it is most likely the biggest women's fight around at the moment, just due to the fact of both times before it has been entertaining. And I mean, Taylor has done incredibly well to be able to get the win on both occasions, even though she's been out in America. There's not many fighters that can go and have these close decisions and still have them go their way, even as the technical away fighter. But Taylor has been able to do so on both occasions. She was in a close fight last time out, and she won 95-94 on all 3 judges' scorecards, so a very close fight last time, and it was controversial. I mean, I think the fans, and of course Serrano, is now clocking on to Taylor's dirty type of style to an extent. It's often using her head. She got caught using her head on multiple occasions. That's why she got a point deduction. I felt like that could have maybe even made it even closer to go and to actually make it onto a draw, but of course it wasn't. But yeah, the fact that she was using the head was very noticeable, and I mean, you've seen that in multiple Katie Taylor fights. She definitely leads with her head against Chantelle Cameron on both occasions. She had Cameron cut, especially in that last one, and so yeah, that is something in which is definitely a noticeable thing now. Will Serrano be able to counteract against it? I'm not entirely sure, but realistically, this could be a kind of final fight for both of them, to be completely honest. I think that both of them aren't going to want to take a step down in their careers, which, there's no real, that's not a bad thing at all. I think that's completely fair from what they both achieved and how long they've both been in the sport. I mean, people are forgetting that Katie Taylor is 40 years of age now. She isn't the young fighter coming through anymore. She's had these big fights, she's had these big nights, and this could be a final hurrah for both of these fighters. And I think that's what's going to make this fight again even more interesting, just due to the fact of, I think it will be both fighters really giving their all, and maybe we could see the winner go on to fight a Cameron again, or a Cameron for the first time if Serrano does win. But for the most part, I think the loser most definitely probably will retire, even if it is a really close fight again. I don't see them making a fourth fight unless something really controversial happens in this one. But, like I said, I feel like it is going to be a bit of a close fight for both. And to be fair, I mean, the build-up between the two of them, there was that press conference, and it seemed like there was a bit of a back and forth. There hasn't really been too much tension between the two of them in the build-ups to their previous fights, but it seemed like there was a little bit ahead of this one. I think they were talking about, the Serrano was calling out the style of Taylor and things like that, and so there was a little bit of a back and forth. And hopefully for the press conferences coming, on the day of recording this, it's not been the press conference just yet for the fight week, but that could be entertaining to see. And I mean, during the last fight, Taylor, she definitely did get saved by the bell in round one of their last fight. And, she's incredibly tough, Taylor. In the first fight between the two of them, Taylor, her knees kind of buckled and she almost went down. There's a knockdown. She managed to stay on her feet, and that was inevitably how she was able to win. In this fight, in round one, she was able to hang on just to the end of the round to be able to win. She seems to always know how to hang on and do just enough to be able to survive against Amanda Serrano. Of course, the question is always going to be there of if she can do that again when Serrano is, that little bit younger and Taylor's just getting older, and, they've been through more and more wars. Is Taylor going to be able to keep surviving the more powerful fighter in Serrano? Serrano is definitely the more powerful fighter. I don't think she's got amazing power. I think, it is evident that she hasn't really been stopping that many fighters as of recent, but she definitely has got the more tough kind of power, the more strong power, and Taylor, she's just really efficient. I got to give that to her. She's very accurate. Serrano can be made to be a little bit inaccurate at times and can be made to miss, but Taylor, for the most part, she'll throw in these flurries, these fast, quick flurries, which really do enough to be able to catch the eyes of the judges and really do enough to be able to win rounds. Where Serrano, yes, she might have a round or two where she's able to catch Taylor with a nice shot, but Taylor's just always able to respond with these quick flurries, which, like I say, really are eye-catching. And the fact that it's so efficient is really impressive. And again, like I say, that's a route to victory in which she's always been able to have. And will either of these fighters be able to deal with it? Will either these fighters come in with a different game plan? Perhaps. We will have to wait and see. And of course, as well, this is nice to see that it's going back to Madison Square Garden for this one. For my prediction of who I think is going to win the main event, I'm going to go with Amanda Serrano via majority decision. Yes, perhaps that is controversial as a kind of British boxing fan myself. I know Katie Taylor's from Ireland, but still, I have followed Katie Taylor's career throughout a lot of her career and have always been a big fan. But I just think that Amanda Serrano will be able to nick it. I think if she hurts Taylor in more than one round, if Taylor doesn't cut Serrano with a headbutt, if Serrano can just put it on that little bit later where Taylor does get a little bit tired, when it's just really kind of sock 'em in the end of the final round, I think Serrano is just going to be able to nick it, where, the age is going to be on Serrano's side that little bit more so. And inevitably, like I say, I think she is going to be able to nick it via a very close, again, fight, which is going to end in a majority decision. Again, I don't believe that there will be a fourth fight for this one, a quadrilogy, if you want to call it that. I don't think it's going to be that, but inevitably, like I say, I think Serrano is finally going to get the win in which she's always desired. And then, realistically, she could go on to fight a Cameron if Cameron wins on this card, or she could go on to fight a Maya and move up in weight and try and become another world champion at another weight. Who of course Maya is WBO welterweight champion, but inevitably it wouldn't surprise me if both fighters do retire, if they both have another all-out great war. And then if they do that, then I feel like the fans have just got to give it up to both fighters because of just what they've achieved, what they've done, and how well they have built themselves and how well they've pushed women's boxing in their careers. Moving on now, though, to the co-main event from what I believe is the co-main event of this card. It is Alycia Baumgardner versus Jennifer Miranda for the Undisputed World Super Featherweight titles. And Alycia Baumgardner is aiming to make a return. She fought against Delphine Persoon, I believe last year, if not the year before, a little while ago. And before that, she had a break as well, which was about a year break after her fight versus Leonardo too. Of course, Baumgartner was signed with Matchroom again, another name, and then she's moved over to MVP as well. But it is interesting to see what's kind of gone on perhaps behind the scenes with Baumgartner. I mean, everything happened with her, and her drug test coming positive, and then I mean, I didn't see no kind of records of her innocence in any kind of way, Baumgartner, and she did seemingly have a year out, which of course is what Ryan Garcia's had, and of course that was all public that he's had the time out. But Baumgartner maybe secretly did serve a ban quietly. Again, that would not surprise me at all, and in my opinion, I think she did look a bit lesser against Persoon. Perhaps she maybe looked a little bit more disciplined and wasn't fighting quite as aggressively as she was, in previous fights. But I did think she looked a bit slower on her feet. Obviously, it only went 4 rounds because Baumgartner and Persoon had a head clash and then it went to a technical decision. But Baumgartner was doing enough to dominate where we didn't really need to see a rematch, and nobody was really too bothered about a rematch. But Persoon was an aged Persoon. Baumgartner was dominating, but it wasn't an amazing performance. And like I say, she did look slower on her feet, and maybe, just speculating that could be due to some sort of substance being involved in Baumgartner before. I'm not entirely sure. Though Miranda is coming into this as a bit of an untested fighter. I mean, she's got 1 KO on her resume. That is a brutal knockout. Feel free to go and check that out if you have not looked at that already. It was against a journeywoman, but still, that was a very brutal knockout. But other than that, she's been kind of ticking away in Spain and getting a few fights, like I say, really not tested. This is a major opportunity for her. Perhaps the fans might not be too clued up on this fight or caring as much about this one just because of Miranda not having a big name. But, at 38 years of age, this is Miranda's opportunity to really go out there and put on a showcase performance. I'm going to go for a controversial win for Jennifer Miranda just due to the fact of her. I think it's going to be a majority decision. I think that Alycia Baumgardner is going to look poor, to be completely honest. I don't think she's going to have the same level of spite in her. I think Miranda is a high output fighter who can fight on the front or the back foot. Yes, it's not always the cleanest, but I think she's going to have more in her than that of a Persoon, and I think she's going to cause problems to Baumgardner. Baumgardner might be able to move better in the first couple of rounds, but I could see a really tiring Baumgardner. And again, the mix of perhaps what might have happened with this whole drug saga, but then also the fact of her just having so much time out, Alycia Baumgardner, I just don't think it's going to play out well for her. And Miranda, like I say, untested, have a lot to prove, really going to give her all in this fight. I think that with the output in which she throws and, she fights, with a heart on her sleeve type of fighter. Yes, it's not always the most technical and the most neatest, but she'll throw over your guard and be able to have success with her straight shots. And I think, like I say, she's going to be able to nick a close majority decision just by out throwing alone, in my opinion. Then who she could go on to fight next. I mean, Alycia Baumgardner again possibly could happen if MVP want to rerun that. Or in a Shobber, she could be made to fight her. She's doing quite well and really getting herself in a good position coming out, fighting out of the UK. But, she's from Nigeria, but she's been fighting in the UK. Or Ayadi, French 35 undefeated fighter. Again, is another name that could happen, but I just don't really see any kind of major big names happening for Jennifer Miranda if she is able to beat Alycia Baumgardner, just in my opinion. Going on now to speak about Ellie Scotney versus Yamileth Mercado for the IBF, WBC and WBO World Super Bantamweight titles. I think it is showcasing the strength of this card just by highlighting how low on the card this is, to be completely honest. I think it's amazing to see that a fight like this can be low on the card, but, like I say, it is a really good contest in my opinion. And, again, this is another matchroom name, perhaps going a little bit, but I think Scotney is a fighter who really is going under the radar, and from all the UK talents in the women's scenes at the moment, I think Ellie Scotney arguably is the best. I mean, you look at your Sky Nicholsons and your Terry Harpers and your Lauren Prices. It's kind of a Lauren Price Ellie Scotney kind of debate in my opinion of who is the best. Caroline Dubois I don't think's been tested enough yet, but Ellie Scotney I think, like I say, is really going under the radar and needs these kind of big matchups and needs to be getting these big matchups. She's been fighting some decent fights. She fought Leffe Burr and she fought Miyamoto, and I give her respect for fighting both of them fighters because they were two quite avoided fighters, and Scotney was willing to give them their opportunities. But now she definitely should be going on to trying to fight for these undisputed titles or pushing for more and more unified titles. Obviously this isn't quite undisputed, but Mercado has been a dominant champion in her own right. I mean, I've touched upon how she hasn't really fought many noticeable names. Before Ali, she really hadn't fought anybody of real note and been able to get a win. She lost to Serrano quite convincingly, but then, like I say, she fought Ali and was able to have success. And, it was a bit of a scrappy fight where Ali didn't look the best, but Mercado was able to kind of just land a bit more. But again, it was a bit scrappy, not really the best of fights. But I think Scotney with Shane McGuigan is a very good fighter who is going to be able to showcase a higher level of skill than that of Mercado and win via unanimous decision. Like I say, I think she is a very underrated fighter. I think she's very technically sound. I would like to see her set up her shots a little bit better, and I think that's something that may come with this fight. Perhaps she could do that, and I think that's what will really be able to showcase the levels if she can do that for this fight, and that will really make fans watch her a bit more if she's able to really go on out there and put on a technical boxing display, which I really think she could, instead of just a firefight with Mercado. But even when she is fighting in close, I think she's far more technical, switches up her shots a lot better, is able to catch shots better coming in, and inevitably, like I say, will be able to win via unanimous decision. Then who she could go on to fight next? I mean, realistically, Flores Rasquero is the WBA champion. That wouldn't surprise me if that does happen with the route that she's going down, with MVP perhaps being involved. She could then get pushed on to fight her. Tiana Brown is WBC champion up at featherweight. That could be made into an interesting, exciting matchup if she's feeling like she's done all she can do in the super bantamweight division. Or, if she's still willing to work with a matchroom boxing fighter, or if Sky Nicholson is wanting to move over to MVP, that's a fight that could definitely happen. I mean, Nicholson just recently, last weekend, had her first fight in the super bantamweight division. She won via stoppage, yes, against a much lesser opponent, but, now she could really go on and maybe stake a claim for a world title shot herself, and so maybe that could happen next, and that would be a very exciting fight. And so yeah, now to move on to Savannah Marshall versus Shadasia Green for the IBF and WBO World Super Middleweight titles. It is surprising in my opinion. I was surprised to see a lot of these fighters join MVP, but I think Marshall was one that possibly, surprised me the most, and that's just mainly just due to because Marshall had been doing her things with Boxer, and yes, there was a bit of a fallout with Boxer, and now nobody really knows what's going on with Boxer at the moment. But Marshall joined MVP, and I think that's definitely one of the best moves she could make in her career. I think with Marshall joining MVP, it could perhaps make the Shields rematch much more likely to happen, just due to her, fighting with a bigger promotion. I think Shields might be willing to fight an MVP, and that, definitely could happen. I mean, Marshall hasn't fought in over 2 years. I think when she does fight and she's at her best, I think she's an excellent fighter, Marshall. And, in this division, of course, the higher weight divisions are really poor still, in my opinion. I don't think there's a great level of competition still, and you're seeing how easy Clarissa Shields is just going through the kind of quote unquote champions up in the higher weight divisions, and she's going to be fighting Lainey Daniels next, Clarissa Shields, and you would expect her to win that one. But Savannah Marshall, she fought Cruz Dezern. In my opinion, that was quite an easy contest where I thought Savannah Marshall did win a bit more convincingly than the scorecards gave it. And, Cruz Dezern arguably lost, in my opinion, in her last fight against Citlali Ortiz. And, just got lucky with the fight going her way. And then Cruz Dezern, of course, beat Shadasia Green in a fight in which was a really, not an eye-catching, appealing fight. And, like I say, I feel like Marshall against Shadasia Green, who has, gone and tried to rebuild her career. She was with MVP for quite a while now. She has, like I say, been rebuilt a little bit with them, and she's not realistically lived up to the expectations from what I thought of her so far, in my opinion. And I think she, looked all right against Wat Paul in her last fight. I think she was on the undercard of Tyson and Paul as well. And again, that was a fight that was all right for Jadacia Green, but I feel like she could be a lot better of a fighter, but she's just very slow on her feet and the reactions are really poor. I think Marshall works very well behind the jab. I think she may perhaps lose the physical battles, but inevitably I think she's going to be able to win comfortably via unanimous decision. I think she can stay behind the jab realistically all night and be able to have tremendous amounts of success and, slip under a lot of shots in which Shadasia Green throws, and it might get a little bit messy at times with the fight getting tangled up, but for the most part I think, like I say, Marshall is basically going to be able to jab her way to victory. And even if she wants to throw her her overhand or another straight shot, she will probably not find it too difficult to be able to land on the target of Green. And then realistically, of course, in a fan's perspective, we would like to see the Shields rematch. I think she is probably giving up her MMA career. It wouldn't surprise me if that's already kind of been pushed aside and over with PFL. I just think that was a one-time thing with PFL paying her a lot of money to do that. So that could probably be out the window. So it's probably, in my opinion, either a Shields rematch or a Cruz Dezern rematch. The Cruz Dezern rematch wouldn't surprise me. You can build a narrative of it being arguably a close fight just because of the scorecards in the first fight. And of course, now Cruz Dezern is WBC and WBA champion. We could have it for the Undisputed titles. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me if that does happen next. Moving on to the second to last fight in which I'm going to be speaking about on this card, and that is Cherneka Johnson versus Shurretta Metcalf. I think this is, of course, for the Undisputed World Bantamweight titles. It is an excellent fight, and a fight in which is really going under the radar, and I think it is really going to make for a great matchup. And, Johnson, I do think, was arguably kind of set to join MVP. I don't think it was I think it just came at a good time due to the fact of course, Forsand having to drop out of the fight. So it kind of, came as a bit of a good surprise for the fans. But again, like I said, I think it wouldn't have surprised me if Johnson would have joined MVP anyway. But this definitely, in my opinion, has the potential to be a possible secondary fight of the night with two aggressive fighters and two fighters that really do need a good promoter. I think they can both be made into stars realistically, and whoever wins this one, really should be pushed a bit more because, Metcalf has an entertaining, way in which she sells herself. She is a good talker, and she's quite fiery and reminds me a bit of the way that Clarissa Shields talks. And Johnson has got an entertaining style in which she's got a big fan base as well. She could definitely go on to be pushed a lot better than that of what Top Rank was doing. They are arguably both coming off the best performances of their careers. Metcalf became a world champion where she beat Yoshida, and Johnson kept her titles after a controversial win against Hughes the time before. And in that Johnson fight, I was expecting Nina Hughes to be able to have more success, but Cherneka Johnson boxed a lot smarter. I think she was, coming in, but at least just keeping her hands up, and she was going to the body much nicer. She was using her height and really imposing herself very well, and was really pushing back Nina Hughes, and that's what you want to be doing against an older fighter who, is much smaller than you. And Shurretta Metcalf, was on a fight in which wasn't promoted that highly, her, world title fight against Yoshida, but that was, a Yoshida who was coming off a win against Ebony Bridges, and it was a rematch for Metcalf, and, Metcalf got given that opportunity, and Metcalf fought well. She fights well on the back foot. She uses a straight shot. She's well composed in high intense situations. She can, like I say, throw well on the back foot. Yes, she will fight her chin up in the air, but she is quite accurate and efficient in her work. And who do I think is going to win? I think that Cherneka Johnson is going to be able to win via TKO in round 8. I could see this being an all-action firefight. I would like to see there at least be one stoppage on this card, and I think that Cherneka Johnson is going to be able to be the one, if anybody, to be able to do it. And inevitably, like I say, I think she's going to be able to walk down Shurretta Metcalf. I think Metcalf will be willingly going on the back foot, and then I think Cherneka Johnson will be able to rip to the body nicely, and Metcalf, if she's having to deal with the high guard of Johnson, then Johnson will probably be able to have a lot more success. And this could be the makings of a great fighter. I think she showed so much improvement, like I say, in that last fight against Nina Hughes, where I think she is going to have the capabilities to go on to become a really great fighter now, Cherneka Johnson. And I don't think she is coming in realistically on short notice. Like I say, I think she was already set to sign with MVP. And like I say, I think she's going to be able to win via TKO in round 8. And then who she could go on to fight next. I mean, we'll have to wait and see what's happening with Forsland. Of course, former champion. She's let up both of her belts, which is very, respectable of her, to then become vacant. So this fight is for the Undisputed titles. But she is still Ring Magazine champion. So, perhaps that could still happen at some point. But like I say, we'll have to wait and see what happens with Forsland. If not, Gale has just signed with MVP. New signing. She's an IBO champion. That could easily be made, and that could be an exciting one to be made as well. I think like Gale definitely does deserve the fights and the opportunities at this point. Or a Scotney rematch could be made for Cherneka Johnson if she's willing to move up into the super bantamweight division. Perhaps that could happen. And then one final fight in which I wanted to touch upon on this card is Chantelle Cameron against Jessica Camara. This is for the WBC Interim World Super Lightweight title, and Cameron is basically on this card just to kind of get herself back in a position to possibly have a trilogy with Taylor, or perhaps have a fight against Amanda Serrano. She's in a good position now. She obviously was the only fighter to be able to get a win over Katie Taylor. That's definitely what made her name stand out. She was then unfortunate with, of course, the head clash, and, was in a close fight against Katie Taylor when they fought in Ireland. And, respect Cameron. She did what Taylor's doing now with Serrano, where she went over to Ireland and fought. And, perhaps if Taylor's wanting that Crow Park fight, she could definitely go and have that with Chantelle Cameron as a perhaps final fight if she's, even if she wins or loses against Amanda Serrano. But that's probably why she's on this card. She was with Queensbury, and like I said, that didn't seemingly last very long, and I don't really think Queensbury got their money's worth out of Chantelle Cameron if it was a big contract, in my opinion, just due to the fact of Cameron only had a couple fights. She didn't have any of her major fights with Queensbury, and I don't know, like I say, if there's some cross promoting happening here or not. I'm not entirely sure. But now she's fighting Jessica Camara. Camara's record, everybody knows what should have happened in that last fight against Dubois. She got beaten up, but then of course was lucky, I suppose, in Camara's way to be able to get a head clash. She's moving up in weight, and she did look weak in that Dubois fight, so it's probably smart to see her moving up in weight. And I mean, this is definitely one of the weaker matchups on this card, definitely one that leans much more to one fighter than the other. And I mean, Cameron is made to smother, and perhaps Camara might be able to do that, but for the most part, I do believe that Chantelle Cameron will be able to win convincingly via unanimous decision and be able to put on a very well-rounded performance, which will be too much. It wouldn't surprise me if she gets a stoppage versus Camara, just from what I saw against Camara and Dubois, but Cameron just isn't really a massive puncher, so I just don't really see her being able to get the stoppage. I think Cameron will just be enjoying the occasion and the fight time that she's able to get against, still a relatively well-ranked contender. And then, perhaps she goes on to fight Taylor Serrano. If not, maybe she could go on to fight Maya herself, or Price or Ryan. I feel like perhaps them opportunities could come available. Or if Taylor and Serrano both retire, perhaps Chantelle Camara might just wait around in the super lightweight division for other fighters to perhaps come and try and fight for the vacant titles, and maybe that could be a route for Chantelle Cameron to go down. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.